CDawgVA, he's been in Japan for quite a while now, and he has put out his list on 5 things he wished he knew before coming to Japan. Now, I am something of a Japan myself, so I thought we might go through his list, see what we think, give it a rank, and also include a couple of our own tips. So let's get started.
So here are the 5 things that I wish I knew before I moved to Japan. So the first thing I wish I knew before moving to Japan is Furusato nozei, or literally meaning hometown tax. It's a system that lets any tax-paying residents within Japan divert a portion of their income and resident taxes to local governments outside of where they actually live. And in return, you get free stuff. It's typically about 3 times the cost of the normal item, and you have to pay up front. Then you make sure you file it on your taxes, and you'll get that amount deducted from your overall tax bill. Basically, in a really long-winded way, making it free.
Now, I have never heard of this. After all my years living in Japan, I have never heard of Furusato nozei, and I just hired an accountant who is charging me an arm and a leg. This guy is literally costing me 420,000 yen a year, and he did not tell me about this. Now, of course, I assume this is only for residence tax and not business tax, but let's see just what you can do with this.
Obviously, a system like this does have some downsides. You do need a lot more cash upfront to buy the thing that you want, and you don't really get to decide when the product comes. So if you're buying fresh produce, for example, you kind of have to be ready to cook it and use it immediately when it shows up. But overall, it's a pretty amazing system that supports areas of Japan hurting with the effects of depopulation, and you get free stuff.
That is a fantastic system. Right away, I can see that this won't be very useful for most people. And I say that because a lot of people that come over to Japan are Americans. Americans have a special tax agreement with Japan where they don't pay tax to Japan locally for the first 2 years, and they pay it to America. And then after that, they get double taxed, which is just outrageous. But since these people won't be paying any tax at all for a couple of years, there's really no money to claim back, so you can't actually take advantage of any free stuff. Now, if you are planning to stay in Japan for more than 2 years, this is a fantastic system. However, another problem that I can see is that most people that come over to Japan from Western countries are also English teachers. And English teachers typically only stay in the country for 2, 3, and maybe 4 years. It's very unlikely that you see someone staying for 5 unless they're staying in Japan forever. Another issue with this for people that are planning to come over to Japan as English teachers is English teaching in Japan is a fairly low paying job, and you won't really have that sort of disposable income to be able to wait an entire year after paying 3 times the price. But provided you're doing something like social media, tech, engineering, or you're just going to stay in Japan for a long time, this sounds like a fantastic season, and I'll absolutely be taking advantage of it. So I've actually learned something from this video already.
I wish I had learned some popular Japanese karaoke songs. I know this is so dumb, but in my experience as a foreigner, when I'm drinking out in Japan with my Japanese friends, nothing breaks the ice quicker than singing Japanese songs at karaoke.
He's right, this would be a great icebreaker, but you don't actually need to know Japanese songs. You just really need to know some popular songs, and my tip for this is just sing Disney songs. I'm not much of a karaoke guy. I don't really like it, but I've had fun doing it. You get enough drinks in me, I'm probably going to enjoy anything. My go-to picks for karaoke are typically Be Prepared or Whole New World, and everyone in Japan knows those songs. Of course, learning some obscure Japanese songs or some enka would be an interesting conversation starter.
But I do remember a time where I was out with 5 Japanese friends, and it was my turn to pick a song, and I picked I'm Not Okay by My Chemical Romance. And they didn't know the song, so I just looked really weird while I'm screaming my heart out, crying, I'm not okay. And I should have just learned a bloody Doraemon song and made my life easier.
I'm going to disagree with this a little bit because pretty much every Japanese person has their own favorite song too. And there's nothing wrong with just enjoying yourself at karaoke. Yeah, if you sing a song that nobody knows, you might be singing it by yourself, but that's fine because the next song you can do a duet with someone else. And also singing songs that people don't necessarily know is a good way to, again, give them an opportunity to, maybe learn something new themselves.
I think weirdly it just helps show an understanding of Japanese pop culture, as there's no quicker way to become friends with someone than bonding over shared media. And to illustrate this point, I don't think there's any age group in Japan that doesn't know Cruel Angel Thesis from Evangelion. Every single person knows this song in Japan, and if you could sing it, I think it'll help make those awkward situations a little bit more fun.
This is absolutely true. People have been singing this song for the last 30 years and arguing about which is best girl for longer. It's Masato, by the way. But I can remember specifically when I first came to Japan, we were doing a night out in Kyoto and we missed our last train. So we tried to go and sleep in a karaoke room because they're fairly cheap and you can rent them for a few hours until the first train start running at 5 a.m. We heard this song all night and it was impossible to get any rest whatsoever. We should have just stayed up drinking and singing. It would have been a much more productive use of our time.
But enough about me, what are some amazing suggestions from our viewers? A couple of people pointed out about sayonara sales. For all the foreigners that want to come to Japan, there's also a bunch that want to leave, and they have a ton of furniture that they need to get rid of. But make sure you don't get a fridge with cockroaches in it, like I did. I paid $100 for a used fridge, and it had cockroaches on it, and I'm still not over it!
I kind of have a bunch of negative experiences with sayonara sales, so I don't typically use them anymore. When I first moved to Japan on the JET program, typically what you would do is you would buy all of your predecessor's stuff. However, my predecessor in particular was staying in Japan because she was becoming the prefectural advisor. What this meant is that I had nothing in my apartment for the first 3 months because I had spent all my money just getting Japan and getting set up and with contracts and everything. So I literally had nothing except one rusty fan. I didn't even have light fixtures. Like, this is one thing that'll happen if you move into like really rural areas. You have to actually bring your own light fixtures, not even like bulbs, the actual fixture first, then you have to plug the light bulb into that. Now, I was able to find some light fixtures at a secondhand store, but this was very frustrating for me. I did try and take advantage of some sayonara sales, but the quality of the stuff that was on offer was pretty bad, and people were trying to get a lot of money for it. And frankly, I just don't like dealing with people on like Facebook Marketplace, which was the venue at the time for it. I think it's much better to just go to a secondhand shop, but it's definitely buyer beware.
And the third thing on my list of things that I wish I knew before I moved to Japan is reading the air, or in Japanese, kuki o yomu. Sometimes people can also refer to it as taking the hint, but I feel like that's kind of not doing the phrase justice. There was a really good BBC article about this as well that I'll link down below, but it also references a tweet that went viral in Japan in 2019 that really helps explain this thought process. So the story goes that there was a businessman who met with a potential client in Kyoto, and this potential client that the businessman was meeting with complimented him on his watch. And at first the man thought, oh, he must want to know more about the watch, so he began to explain all the watch's features to this potential client, where really what the man wanted him to do was to look at his watch so he could see the time and wrap up the conversation.
This particular example is a little bit extreme. Kyoto people do have a bit of a reputation for being a bit colder than the average Japanese person. I feel like even Japanese people would have a problem detecting this one. I think that's even what the article itself says. But there certainly is a lot of these sort of things in Japan. I remember an example being that there was a girl that I knew that was on a subway and she was using her AirPods, and they were kind of leaking sound out of the side, and people tried to be very quiet on the train. So a Japanese person came up to her and started Googling something on their phone, and they were going through Google Translate how to say in English, your headphones are too loud. And they didn't even say this, they just kind of held it and pretended to be reading it, but in such a way that the woman could see that's what they wanted them to know. And then she kind of very sheepishly turned down her volume. Yeah, a lot of Japanese people do this, and it can be very frustrating, but it's kind of just part of living in Japan.
I wouldn't think, oh, Connor, that's a nice watch. Please stop talking.
But for real, that is a very nice watch. What is that? Tissot Chemin de Therese Skeleton. Look, I can't even pronounce this, let alone afford it. But yeah, that is a very nice watch. Very, very jealous, actually.
And before I tell you number 4, let's go back to the viewers to see what they also wish they knew. So here are some very fast tips. Get used to using the app Line. Everyone in Japan uses it to communicate, and no other apps are really popular, so download Line.
Couldn't be more true. I believe this is also true in Korea with Kakao Talk. Although I found that recently a lot of people use Instagram as well. But yeah, you absolutely need Line in Japan.
Learn some little tidbits about different areas in Japan, because if you're in a conversation with someone, people are often very proud of where they're from in Japan, and if you know a little bit about where they're from, they're going to really appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely true. This is actually a really good video so far. I'm actually quite impressed.
And lastly, when you're booking a bullet train, some bullet train stations are not the main station in the city, and sometimes they're really far out. Shin Aomori and Shin Hakodate are really far outside the town, so just make sure to keep that in mind.
So I haven't encountered this too much myself, but I typically travel more in western and southern Japan, although I am going up to Hokkaido in October, so this is a good tip for me. Thank you very much, Connor.
Now I know you have all heard this complaint before, but it is a real one, and it is a truly terrifying aspect of Japanese culture that I wish I had prepared myself for more. It is the endless bureaucracy and forms. Anyone who has tried to open a bank in Japan will tell you that they have experienced true pain, okay? It's bad.
Yeah, this is kind of like the newbie shuffle when you come to Japan. You have to find an apartment, you have to find a bank account, and you have to find a phone number, and you need one of the others to get any of them. It is incredibly frustrating. A bit of a tip you can do though is just give your friend's phone number and pretend it's yours and then just switch it back later once you have the others. However, this isn't actually as much of a problem provided you're being sponsored by a good company for your visa. Typically your boss will help you set up these sort of things and they can give their phone number or address until you get it set up yourself. But if you're coming over independently, like as a YouTuber in Connor's example, this is incredibly frustrating.
But enough about me. What do the viewers think are some things that you should know before moving to Japan? Some people mentioned that they wish they had gone to more cultural events. Oftentimes in Japan, there are large cultural events and loads of festivals that are easy to miss.
I see that Connor has also been struck by the yellow tick of including images from Kanamara Matsuri. Very disappointing that YouTube does that, but it is what it is. So local events, Matsuris, are my favorite thing in Japan by far. When I first moved to Japan, I took part in a Matsuri called Sagicho Matsuri, which is absolutely fantastic. It happens in March, very close to Kyoto, so if you have the opportunity, I definitely recommend it. There are festivals in every month in Japan, and they are fantastic, and I could not recommend them more. I actually do have a video about the best things to do throughout the entire year in Japan. I guess I'll put it up here or here or something. Definitely check it out if you are planning a trip to Japan, because there is some incredible things that you don't want to miss.
The Hito Bito, who I have no doubt you're all familiar with their TikTok, suggests learning a bit of local dialect, which I do agree with because I live in Tokyo, and whenever I go to Osaka, I am perpetually confused at what people are saying. I don't really understand much, and it would be so much easier if I knew a little bit of Kansai Ben, and it would just be a fun talking point.
Yeah, Kansai Ben is really good to learn because it's very friendly. I actually live in Kansai, and if you've perhaps you're an ancient person like me and you've seen Azumanga Daioh, the character Osaka is kind of based around this kind of friendly way of talking. To kind of put this in perspective, using Kansai Ben is a bit like if you had a very southern or Texan accent and you went to New York, and people would immediately notice that you're not from around there, and it kind of has an endearing quality to it. I actually specifically use Kansai Ben when I go to Tokyo just because I know that it's a very easy way to break the ice with Japanese people. A little example of some easy Kansai Ben is usually people would say wakaranai for I don't know in Japan, but in Osaka you can say wakarahen. If you're hungry, you could say haraheta. If you want to be like really silly, you could use a very popular Osaka phrase, which is nandianen. Everyone in Japan seems to love this phrase, and there's even like a parody song based around it.
Obviously, another thing that you should know before moving to Japan is that working within Japanese companies can be pretty brutal. Work-life balance isn't really a thing in Japan, and just make sure if you're applying for a company, do your due diligence and make sure that you're not getting yourself into working 90 hours a week. That is obviously an exaggeration.
Yeah, he says that's an exaggeration, but I literally ended up working for a black company in my second time in Japan, and they absolutely flouted the labor laws, and it was a terrible experience. Fortunately, I don't have to work for them anymore, but yeah, you will learn very quickly about the phrase zangyo, which is overtime in Japan, and it's not typically paid, but it is typically mandatory. This is definitely a problem that Japan needs to work on.
And the final thing that I wish I did before moving to Japan is, it's pretty obvious. I should have learned more Japanese. It will make your life significantly easier. And even now that I've been here for nearly 6 years, I do often feel like, man, I wonder how many of those fun things that I did could have been enhanced more if I just knew a bit more of Japanese.
So this is very true, but I will add another caveat, and that is that the better your Japanese is, the less forgiving people will be of your mistakes. And this is kind of exemplified in a phrase called gaijin smash. Now, gaijin smash is the idea that because you're a foreigner, you can get away with certain things. Now, there are some people that take this to the extreme and try not to even pay for trains, pretending they just don't know that you had to pay. This is ridiculous. Do not do that. This is illegal. But there are certain things like maybe a policeman comes up to you and starts talking to you. If you start talking with thick and fast English, the policeman will sometimes just walk the other way. Now, if you speak Japanese, they'd be much more likely to keep interrogating you and maybe search for your possessions. I will emphasize that I think it is better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. But I don't think you need to be as worried these days. Everyone in Japan has English signage, and a lot of work has been done to make it much more friendly for tourism. Particularly, they updated the country very recently in 2024 for the Olympics, which no tourist could actually go to because of, yeah, I mean, very good video and very good tips. I'm surprised I had never heard about the hometown tax. I'll definitely be taking advantage of that. I'd give this like an S-rank tier, honestly. Now, as I said at the beginning, I will include a couple of tips of my own. The first and most important tip when coming to Japan is make sure you can slip your shoes on and off. Again, this sounds simple, but when you're going to and fro buildings, you don't want to be the person holding up the queue because you have to lace and unlace your shoes. Just get something comfortable. You'll be doing a lot of walking in Japan. People really underestimate how many stairs and steps there really go into just traveling in Japan, let alone living there. But you'll probably be doing something like 20,000 steps a day, so make sure you bring something comfortable. A problem that tourists and locals have alike is just dealing with how much coins you get in Japan. Now, this really surprised me when I first moved here, coming from a mostly cashless country. But there are a couple tricks you can do to make this a lot easier, so you don't have to go to Don Quixote and buy the viral coin holder. The first part might sound very simple, but you can overpay for things so that you can get better change. What I mean by this is if you were paying for something that was 310 yen and you needed to use an 1,000 yen bill, check to see if you have a 10 yen coin as well. It's much better to get 700 yen changing coins rather than say 690. That's going to be much more frustrating. Of course, if you're always using exact change, this won't be a problem. But if you do slack a couple times and just throw down the big bills because you just want to get things over with and you find yourself with a big coin purse, then you can actually use a little trick that I've learned, which is re-rolling your change. Re-rolling your change is when you use a vending machine in Japan, but you just put in all your coins first. Now, there are vending machines everywhere in Japan. Now, if you're going to get like a drink or something, they probably won't take a 5 or a 1 yen coin, but restaurants that use ticket machines and supermarkets as well as convenience stores will always take any coin. So what you can do is when you go to pay, dump in all your coins first, it'll count how much you have, and typically the change you get back will be better denomination than you put inside. So it is an absolute lifesaver for dealing with the mountains of change that you get in Japan. And while we're talking about supermarkets, people really underestimate just how high quality and cheap Japanese supermarkets can be, especially for things like sushi. Now, you might think that supermarket sushi sounds pretty bad, but honestly, the sushi that you find in a Japanese supermarket is probably better than the ones you can get at restaurants in your home country. It's also incredibly cheap. And not only is it cheap, it gets cheaper throughout the day. It starts off with like a 20% discount, then it's like a 40% discount, and then sometimes 60 or even 80% discount. It's actually crazy how much of a good deal you can get if you're looking for a very cheap dinner, although you do have to compete with all of the salarymen and people that are coming off their jobs and looking for the same prices. Sometimes you will even see groups of people waiting for the discount ticket man who will come out from the back with his little sticker gun, putting all the tickets on, and they'll go very fast after they reach their max discount. And while we're talking about supermarket sushi, this is one of my super secret tips. Japanese supermarkets have a tremendous range of fish, but a cheap alternative if you want to cook while you're in Japan, instead of buying the cuts of fish, you can actually buy sashimi or even just sushi, throw away the rice, and then you're ready to cook straight onto the pan. No cutting needed. Alright, well that one is a joke. I'm not actually some kind of psychopath that pan fries their sashimi. Japan is also a country of contradictions, and this is kind of exemplified in Connor's video where he talks about how you have to use stamps to do everything. Japan is seen as a very modern country, but there is a lot of old-fashioned systems you have to deal with, and one of these that's very frustrating is just how early the trains will end. You might think that a city like Tokyo or Osaka would have 24-hour trains, but no, even in these major cities, some of the largest in the world, trains basically stop at about midnight or shortly thereafter, and they don't start running again until 4 or 5 a.m. So checking your last train is paramount whether you're traveling or living in Japan. To add on to this, I will tell you just how much I hate taxis in Japan. If you're using a taxi for 10 or 20 minutes, it's probably going to be okay, but over 30 minutes and you're really starting to rack up on the bill. And what's worse is that after midnight, you get an additional service charge. So even if I go out in my own city and I stay past midnight because I'm having too much fun with some friends, I could be looking at an 8,000 or 10,000 yen bill just to go back to my own house, which is about 30 minutes away, which is outrageous because a hotel price is typically half of that. Now, the yen has been very weak recently, so hotel prices are going up. There are a lot of cheap alternatives like manga cafes, karaoke places, or sports clubs like Kaikatsu Club where you can find a small private room with no reservation for about 2,700 yen, which is a fantastic deal. It's actually a really good option for people that are on budget travels as well if they're traveling solo. Now, I didn't really experience too much culture shock when I moved to Japan because I really like to live here. But there was one thing that frustrated me for a long time, and that was when I couldn't tell the difference between real and fake invites. And this kind of is very similar and goes back to what Connor was talking about reading the air. Now, a fake invite in Japan is something like this. You'll be talking with a coworker or a friend, or maybe just even a stranger if you're a tourist at some place. And you might say something like, well, I went to the beach last week, or I love to go hiking. And a Japanese person will say to you, man, that sounds like so much fun. Let's go hiking together. And you'll hear that and you'll say, well, I mean, that sounds great. Let's do it. And they'll say yes, or they'll say or something, and then nothing will ever happen. And you might ask them a week later and say, well, when are we going hiking? And they'll act completely confused. And that's because it wasn't a real invite to begin with. When people suggest things like this, but they do not give a date or a time, then it's not really an invite. It's kind of just like a nice thought, like it would be fun to do this. Now, they're not really doing this on purpose. It's kind of just a cultural thing that you get used to. So just remember that if you're having this sort of conversation and they suggest to do something, but there's no time given, or they don't ask you when you would like to do it, then just don't be offended when they never bring it up again, because, they're just making small talk. Also, come to think of it, it's probably worth telling you how Japanese people say no. Japanese people hate to say no. They'll only use it in the most extreme situations. What they'll typically say is something like they have work, or more frequently, chotto, which just means no. And if you ever hear a Japanese person sucking air through their teeth, that's a hard no, and it's never going to happen. Anyway, guys, those are my tips for what I wish I knew before coming to Japan. YouTube thinks you really want to watch this video, so maybe check that out, and I will see you again very soon.